Loneliness has a strange way of following people, even into crowded places. For Daniel, it was a quiet ache he carried everywhere, invisible to those around him. To the outside world, he looked like any other 35-year-old man going to work, answering emails, attending meetings. But behind his polite smiles and routine greetings, there was an emptiness he rarely spoke about. Daniel lived in a small apartment overlooking the city. Each morning, he would stand by the window watching people hurry through the streets below. Some walked with purpose, some with laughter, and others hand in hand with someone they loved. Daniel often wondered what it felt like to be part of that world, to be someone's first thought in the morning and last thought at night. He wasn't bitter. Not exactly. Life had been kind to him in many ways. He had a steady job, a few loyal friends, and the comfort of stability. But there was still a missing piece, something he couldn't name. A hope that maybe, someday, life would surprise him with more than just routine. That thought often accompanied him to the little coffee shop on the corner of Maple and Fifth. It was his favorite spot. Not for the coffee, but for the silence it offered. The place was small, with warm wooden tables and the smell of roasted beans filling the air. The world seemed slower there, softer, almost like it was waiting for him to notice something he had overlooked. It was on one of those afternoons, while flipping through a worn-out book he had read a dozen times, that he first saw her. She was sitting by the window, her notebook open, her pen resting gently between her fingers. She looked lost in thought, staring at the pages as though the words she wanted were just out of reach. There was something striking about her, not just her beauty, though it was undeniable. It was the stillness around her, the quiet weight she carried in her expression. She smiled faintly when the barista handed her a cup, but the smile didn't quite reach her eyes. Daniel looked away quickly, embarrassed at noticing so much about a stranger. Yet something in him was stirred. It wasn't attraction in the ordinary sense. It was curiosity. Who was she? Why did she look like she was holding on to a secret? The next time he saw her, it didn't feel like chance. She was there again, sitting in the same spot, her notebook open once more. This time, she caught him glancing. Instead of turning away, she offered him a small nod, polite and reserved. Daniel nodded back, his heart unexpectedly racing at the simple exchange. Over the next few weeks, our paths began to cross more often. At first, it was only inside the cafe, quick glances, a half smile, nothing more. Then, strangely, he noticed her at the bookstore across the street browsing the very same section he often visited. Another time he passed her on the sidewalk near the park, her notebook tucked under her arm. Each time, Daniel told himself it was just coincidence. And yet, deep down, a quiet voice whispered that it might be something else. Something he couldn't explain. Emily, that was the name he overheard one afternoon when the barista called out her order. The sound of it stayed with him, echoing in his thoughts long after he left the cafe. Emily, a simple name. Yet somehow it felt like it carried more meaning than he understood. Daniel didn't know her story. He didn't know what she wrote in that notebook or why her eyes seemed both kind and distant. But he knew one thing. For the first time in a long while, his world felt less empty. And somewhere deep within, he sensed that Emily carried a truth she wasn't ready to share. A truth that could either draw them closer or change his life forever. There is a quiet beauty in conversations that stretch into the evening, where words don't need to be perfect because the company itself feels enough. That's how it was with Daniel and Emily. It began with small exchanges in the cafe, polite greetings, a question about the book he was reading, a comment about the rain outside. But soon, their talks lingered. A single cup of coffee turned into an hour of laughter. A passing nod on the sidewalk turned into long walks through the park, with fallen leaves crunching beneath their feet. Daniel found himself drawn to her stories. She spoke of her love for writing, of the notebooks she filled since childhood, each one holding fragments of her heart. She described the quiet lakeside town where she grew up, a place of endless summers and fields that seemed to stretch into forever. Listening to her, Daniel was reminded of his own past, the long drives with his father on country roads, the smell of old books in his mother's study, and the first time he had ever felt the pang of love as a teenager. only to watch it slip away with time. Emily listened in return, not with impatience, but with a warmth that made him feel his memories mattered. She asked questions gently, never rushing him. And Daniel realized how rare it was to be truly heard. But for every memory they shared, there were moments when Emily grew quiet. Sometimes mid-laughter, her expression would soften, her eyes drifting away as though chasing a memory she couldn't bear to speak aloud. Daniel noticed it more than once, yet he never pressed her. He sensed that whatever lived in her silence was delicate, a wound not yet ready to be touched. One evening, as twilight settled over the city, they sat on a bench in the park. The air was cool, carrying the faint scent of autumn leaves. Daniel told her about the summer he spent building a treehouse with his best friend, a memory that still made him laugh. Emily smiled, her gaze steady on him. And for a moment, it felt as if time itself had paused. Then, softly, she said, "It's strange, isn't it? How some memories stay with us forever, while others fade no matter how much we want to hold them." Her voice carried something unspoken, a shadow beneath the words. Daniel wanted to ask her what memory she longed for, what loss she was hiding. But he stayed silent, choosing instead to let her reveal it in her own time. It was in these quiet pauses that their bond deepened, not through grand gestures or declarations, but through the understanding that some stories take longer to unfold. The more they spent time together, the more Daniel felt the stirrings of something he hadn't known in years. It wasn't just companionship, it was the ache of longing, the warmth of being seen, and the fragile hope that maybe, just maybe, this connection was leading somewhere. And yet, there was always a space between them, a hesitation in Emily's smile, a distance in her eyes. Daniel knew she cared. He could feel it in the way she remembered small details about him, the way her laughter softened when he spoke. But he also knew something held her back. What was it? A fear of trust, a wound from the past, or something she had promised herself long ago. Daniel didn't have the answers. All he knew was that Emily was different from anyone he had ever met. And though he could sense the barrier between them, he couldn't stop himself from hoping that one day she might let him in fully, because sometimes the heart doesn't choose the safe path. Sometimes it chooses the path that hurts, the path that waits, the path that believes in something more. And in Daniel's quiet, unspoken heart, he believed that Emily's hidden truth, whatever it was, might be the very thing that would either draw them together or keep them apart forever. Years passed, as years often do quietly, without asking permission. Life carried Daniel and Emily into different directions, though neither could quite explain how the distance began. Perhaps it was silence that grew too heavy, or unspoken fears that stood between them. Whatever the reason, one day their meetings became less frequent, their conversations shorter, until at last they were only memory soft, fragile echoes of a connection that once felt like it could never fade. But life, with all its twists and turns, has a way of bringing people back together. It happened on a rainy afternoon. Daniel had ducked into a small bookstore to escape the sudden downpour. The scent of old pages wrapped around him as he wandered through the aisles, running his fingers over worn spines. He wasn't looking for anything in particular, only shelter, only distraction. And then he saw her. Emily stood at the far end of the aisle, holding a book against her chest, her hair slightly damp from the rain. For a moment, Daniel thought his mind was playing tricks on him. She looked almost the same as he remembered. Genteel, thoughtful, but there was a maturity in her eyes now. Something softened by time and shaped by life's journey. Their eyes met, and the world seemed to pause. No thunder, no crowd. No noise, only two people staring at each other as though the years had dissolved in an instant. "Daniel," she said softly, her voice carrying both surprise and something deeper, something almost like relief. He managed to smile, though his heart was racing. "Emily, it's been far too long." They sat together in the small cafe inside the bookstore, the same way they had once sat in that little shop on Maple and Fifth. Conversation came slowly at first, like hesitant steps across a fragile bridge. But soon the words returned. flowing as naturally as they once had. Emily spoke of the years that had passed, of her work, of the people she had met. Daniel listened, every word stirring the same quiet admiration he had always felt for her. Yet he sensed there was more, something she hadn't yet said. The same distance he had once noticed in her eyes was still there, though softened now, like a secret waiting to be set free. It wasn't until the sky outside grew darker that Emily finally leaned back in her chair and took a deep breath. "Daniel," she said, her voice trembling slightly, "there's something I never told you before. Something I've carried for years." Kay didn't interrupt. He simply waited. "I was afraid," she admitted. "Afraid of letting someone close again. When we first met, I had just walked away from a love that broke me in ways I didn't know were possible. I thought if I'd let you in, I would only lose you too. So I kept a part of myself hidden. I thought distance would protect me. But instead, it left me empty." Her words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of truth. Daniel felt his chest tighten, not with anger, but with a deep ache. He had always sensed there was something unspoken between them, but hearing it now in her own voice was different. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "Not because I chose distance, but because I let fear decide for me. And in the process, I lost someone who mattered more than I realized." Daniel reached for her hand, not with urgency, but with gentleness. Their fingers touched lightly, a reminder of all the years that had passed, and of the bond that time had not erased. "Emily," he said quietly, "you never lost me." "Not really. I carried you with me, even in the silence." Tears glistened in her eyes, but her smile was real, softer, freer than he had ever seen before. In that moment, neither of them knew what the future would hold. But they both understood that fate had given them another chance, and this time they would not waste it. Because sometimes love doesn't come in grand gestures or perfect timing. Sometimes it returns quietly, like rain on a forgotten afternoon, reminding you that even after years of silence, hearts can still find their way back to one another.